you from me, Tim Major at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Extremely pleased to see you here this morning for our Staying Data Safe in the New World. Gives me great delight to welcome our panel. You won't have to listen to me very much. You'll be pleased to know. From Beacon Securities, we've got Jamie Swan and Peter Berry, and from Accelerate, Darren Clare and Gavin Smith. So thank you for coming along this morning, guys. That's very kind. There is the chat box function to use. So if there's any questions, we will have those at the end of our meeting today. And what I'll do is I'll ask those questions to the panel at the end. So if anything arises, no matter how much you think is not relevant, but I'll put my hand up and ask that question. So sometimes a webinar is safer than a meeting room where your hand half goes up, hoping you won't be picked. So you ask me the question and I'll pop it through to the guys. Without further ado, I'll hand you over now to Jamie Swan to start our meeting. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Before we start the session, both myself and Peter from Beacon and Gavin and Darren would just like to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves. So at Beacon Consultant Services, we work with organisations to help them comply with data protection laws and also to achieve the standards of information security, so ISO 27001, and provide an end-to-end solution for all sizes of businesses. So the way we differ from other businesses that work with data protection is that we look to change cultures and mindsets across the organisation so that these sorts of things become the thought process in everything that everyone does across the organisation. So it's all well and good having policies and processes in place, but if you don't have that right culture in place, then it's just not going to work. So we look to change cultures. Gavin and Darren will talk briefly through what Accelerate do shortly and how we complement each other in what we do and why we're partnering together. So just a brief overview. From a data protection point of view, we offer one-off training and consultancy, whether that be for a short-term one-off project or change, or a complete review and revision of the data protection practices across the organisation. We offer tailored training, whether that be bespoke one-hour training sessions to get people up to speed on what they need to do from a data protection point of view. But we also offer large-scale training programs. It can be 2-3 days, whatever's required. We can tailor it for your needs. And outsourced data protection officer services as well. So lots of companies require a data protection officer. Some want one voluntarily, but they don't want the cost of having one full-time. That's something that can be outsourced to us and that we can help with, which reduces the cost for the organisation. From an information security point of view, we're ISO 27001 certified ISMS lead auditors. So that means if you're planning for your company to become certified or are already certified in the standard, we can support you in your preparation for the certification audit or the next surveillance visit. So helping you from day one of that. And we also offer business support. So that's regulatory support. Peter and I have worked in heavily regulated industries for a number of years. So we have an idea and an understanding of how different regulations work. So outside of data protection and information security, we also have knowledge around that, which we can assist you with, as well as Peter being a qualified coach and mentor as well. I'll hand you over to Gavin now to talk about Accelerate briefly, and then we'll get on with the presentation.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So let me just talk to you a little bit about Accelerate. So to start with, let's talk to you about who we are. I'm Gavin. I'm working on the business development side of things. Darren is our Director of Technologies. You'll be hearing a lot from Darren today. He's really the brains behind the outfit. But Darren and I have known each other for a long time. We're both co-founders of the business, but we used to work together in a previous business in the distribution layer. So the likes of Accelerate Technologies and also the largest service providers and systems integrators in the country would have been our customers. And we were working on their behalf into the customers who are actually using the services, building the services, delivering the technical services, deploying the products, And what it led us to understand is there are a lot of IT partners out there who don't have the best interest of their customers at heart. They're actually just there really trying to make money and probably shoehorning technologies into businesses that make them the most money rather than suit the customer. So it was quite a frustrating space for us to be in. We always felt we could do better. And now here we are actually trying to make that a reality. So we bring a real passion for technology, a lot of knowledge and understanding, and a really huge network of contacts in the technology space as well. So it allows us to be really sort of vendor agnostic in our approach, and allows us to concentrate on really building long-term trusted relationships with clients where we are going to be bringing the correct technologies and services for the business rather than just punting technology at people. So in terms of our services, I can make the screen move. So we lead heavily on the consultancy and advice side of things rather than leading technology for you. So the point of this is that we want to actually understand people's businesses, people's environment. We do a lot of assessments to help people actually understand where they are today and where their weaknesses may lie, so that we can help you to improve and resolve those most sort of pressing issues, your biggest vulnerabilities, and then help you take things forward over time. So obviously we do have the technology in our tool bag to go in to fix the issues, but we're very much leading on the consultancy side of things. So to try and explain how we fit with Beacon and the two businesses fit together, the services that our businesses supply are really focused on people, processes, and technology. So immediately we kind of have this same sort of underlying ethos of how we work. Beacon side of things, information security, obviously very heavy on process, very heavy on people, but also needs the underlying technology to support it as well. In terms of what we do on the cybersecurity side, obviously technology is an important part, but if you're not addressing the issues at the people and process level as well, you can't just rely on technology to solve your problems. And if what you're really trying to achieve as a business is full risk mitigation, real compliance, and true business continuity, you need to be addressing both sides, the information security and the cybersecurity side of things across your people, process, and technology. So between our two businesses, we cover all of this, and we don't leave any gaps. So I should pass back to you now, Jamie.
Thanks, Gavin. So as you'll be aware from dialing in today we want to talk to you about data protection, information security, and cybersecurity, which is why the four of us on the call, but particularly during this really difficult time that we find ourselves and our businesses find themselves in at the moment, transitioning staff to home working, back to the office, in some cases back home again. And in a recent survey carried out of CFOs by a company called Gartner, 74% of the CFOs said employees who were forced to work from home were forced to work from home because of the COVID pandemic, and they will continue to remotely work from home after the pandemic ends. So that's a huge number of people transitioning to home working. And you'll see some other home working stats on the screen at the moment, and they show a large number of employees. In fact, 86% of them who worked from home during the pandemic did so because of it, and the likelihood is that a lot of these will continue to work from home going forward. So consideration from businesses needs to happen with regards to the protection of data and other information. So we'll focus on data protection first, and then what I will do is pass you over to Peter, who will look at the information security side of things before Gavin and Darren handle the cyber side of things. So many companies have taken pride in how quickly they've shifted their workforce from an office to home-based working, and I've seen this myself with companies that I've worked with. they've managed to turn it around in a very quick space of time where COVID hit. And they said, well, we've managed to transition all of our staff to working from home within a week, even though they had a huge workforce. So the speed at which workforces were shifted could have an impact on the protection of data, of customers and employees, and particularly if the shift focused on making sure people could work from home from a technology point of view, rather than, well, how does that impact on the data that's going to be processed. So if you have employees that have transitioned to home working, make sure you take some time to think about whether you've prepared them for this transition. And we're going to do a quick poll now, and we'll do some of these throughout just to gauge your views on certain topics. So think about things like, was information provided to you or to members of staff on how working from home could impact the personal data that you process? Were any risk assessments carried out to identify any possible issues? Were any policies updated or created? Were any guidelines given to you or communications sent? So the poll question should be on your screen now. So based on the things I've said there around policies being updated, guidance, risk assessments, have any of those happened within your organisation? And this is a completely anonymous poll, so don't worry, you won't be stitching anyone up by answering this. But if you could answer that, that would be useful. And we'll just give everyone a second to do that and look at the results. Okay, so I think that everyone should be able to see this. Certainly I can on my screen. So you can see from the things that I've talked about there, certainly all of them, 0% of the people on the call have said that all of those things have happened in that transition to home working. In fact, the majority of people said some of them have happened, which is great, but that does potentially leave gaps in what's happened in that transition to home working that could lead to risks around data protection. So it's quite interesting. And a quarter of the people on the call said that none of those things have happened at all, which is a risk. So thanks for that tip. So I just wanted to talk to you about a recent breach that happened. And you may be aware of this, it depends how closely you follow these sorts of things on the news. But last month, a breach occurred in Public Health Wales. It's particularly prudent at the moment as it involved the test results of people who had tested positive for COVID. So this kind of data is obviously very sensitive as it involves people's health and things like that. So relevant protection should have been given towards it. Now, the risk of this sort of information being made public to the individuals concerned could be dramatic. So although it's vitally important we protect all the personal data we process, particular protection should be given to more sensitive data, such in this instance as health data. Now, in this case, luckily, the risk wasn't as high as it could have been, as the data had been redacted to a degree. Therefore, in most cases, only initials, dates of birth, geographical location and sex were published, which meant that individuals would not have been easily identified. But as you can see at the bottom of the slide, 1,928 people who lived in supporting houses or nursing homes had their place of residence published, which does obviously increase the risk. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that the incident was the result of individual human error, which happens quite a lot, certainly in the field of data protection. And an employee uploaded the information to a public server, which was searchable to anyone using the site. So although it wasn't stated that the employee was working from home at the time of the breach, this is the sort of error that can be caused by an employee working from home who potentially has the complacency of working in a home environment, or may not have access to the policies and procedures, or may not know what to do in an instance of a breach occurring. It could be that they ask the person next to them generally, or they have a paper guidelines in the office that they don't have access to at home. So things like that need to be considered. Now, the person who was alerted to the breach on the evening of the 30th of August, after the information was posted on 2 p.m. that day, didn't follow the body's serious incident reporting procedure, and the data wasn't removed until 9:55 the next morning. So there was a large chunk of time where that data was available online. So again, although it wasn't stated it was to do with home working, I'm thinking about the sorts of things, the sorts of issues that home working could have played here. So it could have been that the individual knew about the breach, but they didn't know what to do in those instances. So making sure that your people that are working from home have access to the information on how to report a breach and what to do in certain situations is vital. And cyber attacks on home workers. So we've also seen that number of cyber attacks on home workers have increased since the outbreak. as cyber criminals are exploiting the pandemic for their own gain. So there's some genuine news articles there we've taken from the internet. So again, with staff isolated at home, would they know what to do? Would they know how to recognise a potential phishing attack, which is something that Gavin and Darren will talk a bit more about? Would they know who to speak to? Would they know where to find guidance on the topic? So making sure that your staff are communicated with to know where that information is held. Egress, who are a leading provider of human data security solutions, released a 2020 outbound email data breach report last month, and they surveyed IT leaders, and it showed that 94% of the surveyed organizations have seen an increase in the amount of outbound emails that are sent during COVID, and 93% of the IT leaders surveyed said they'd suffered data breaches through outbound email in the last 12 months. So the survey found that an email data breach happens approximately every 12 working hours. So it's on the rise, hence the need to implement adequate protections and make sure your staff know what to do. The most common breach types were replying to spear phishing emails. So that's like phishing emails, but more targeted at an individual, emails sent to the wrong individual, which I can vouch for, as I see that a lot in the world of data protection, and incorrect file attachments, which is another one that I see quite regularly. So what I've done is taken a lot of information from the ICO website. So this is readily available for all of you to look at, and I would suggest that you use this as a valuable resource. So I've put the link at the bottom of the slide here. What they do is speak to you in very people speak, so it's very easy for you to understand exactly what it is that the point that they're trying to get across. But they've given some guidance around what employers can do to make sure that their staff are working from home safely. So first of all, make sure you have clear policies, procedures and guidelines for staff who are remote working. We've talked about this briefly, but it should include topics like accessing data, handling and disposing of personal data, and consider how you would make your staff aware of that. Would they know where to find those policies and guidance if they needed to? Make sure you're using the most up-to-date version of the remote access solution if you're using that. Remind staff to use unique and complex passwords. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a slide or two, and make sure that multi-factor authentication is available and configured where possible, which again, I think is a topic that Gavin and Darren will talk about briefly. Top 10 tips for employees. Again, this is taken from the ICO website. I've built in some of our own examples and things here as we've seen them. So make sure as an employee you're following your organization's policies, procedures and guidelines. Make sure you know where they are, make sure you understand them. You are accountable for following these policies as well as everyone else in the organization. So avoid doing things that is more convenient for you because you're working from home, such as sending emails from your personal account if you're using your own personal laptop for work. Only use approved technologies when handling personal data. So don't act outside of what your company has put in place to share personal data. You might think it's easier to WhatsApp a colleague some personal data, but that is going to create a risk because you're acting outside of those approved systems. And consider confidentiality when holding conversations or using a screen. If you live in a house share, you may trust the person implicitly that you live with, but that doesn't mean they have authority to hear or to see the personal information that you may be processing. And sorry, I missed printouts there as well. So make sure you take care of the printouts if you've taken any printouts home or you print anything while you're at home. Consider what to do with these. Make sure you follow any of your company's guidelines if they have them in place. Don't mix your organization's data with your own. It sounds common sense, but some of us may be working from our own desktops and using a virtual machine. So make sure there's a segregation between what the company's personal data is and your own. And don't save personal data from your company on your own laptop or into your own files or on your own desktop. Lock away where possible. Might be tricky for people working from home, especially if they're working from a kitchen table. But if you have paper files, you should really be locking these away at night or keeping them somewhere secure. And be extra vigilant about opening web links and attachments, as we talked about earlier, because there is a lot of phishing and spear phishing going on at the moment. So we've got another poll quickly, and this is around the phishing emails or fraudulent phone calls. So whether or not you've been victim to these over the span of coronavirus. I know some people are exploiting coronavirus, as we said, for their own gain. And this is just a sense of how much this sort of activity happens on a day-to-day basis. So just give you a second for that. There we go. Proof's in the pudding. All of us have experienced those. So it happens to us on a daily basis. So we need to be vigilant, extra vigilant as people, both in our personal lives and within our organizations. But we also need to make sure that we have the systems in place to protect against those sorts of things, and the policies and guidelines to tell people what to do within an organization if they receive those phishing emails or fraudulent calls. And finally, make sure you use strong passwords. So there was a study done by a company called Digital Shadows Photon Research. They spent 18 months auditing criminal forums and marketplaces across the dark web, and they saw that the number of stolen usernames and passwords in circulation had increased by 300% since 2018. So there are now more than 15 billion stolen credentials from 100,000 data breaches available to cybercrime actors. So make sure you change your passwords regularly. Don't use the same passwords across all of your logins, and use unique passwords that are hard to crack. So the most common ones are things like 123456 or QWERTY or 22222, but passwords like that can be cracked by a cyber criminal in 0.2 milliseconds. So strong passwords across the board. The National Cybersecurity Centre recommend using 3 random words together, because those are the ones that are harder to crack, such as coffee, train, fish. Make sure you communicate securely using the communication facilities provided by your organization. Again, this goes back to my kind of WhatsApp point. So use of Teams, use of Skype, the internal systems that have been approved, not acting outside of those, excuse me, and keep your software up to date. So if you're working from a personal computer, make sure that the security software is up to date. Don't make it easy for the hackers. So if your organization has provided you with equipment and systems, make sure you're using them. So I'm going to pass you over to Peter now, and Peter will talk to you a bit more about information security. Mute, Peter.
Thanks, Jamie. Sorry. Morning, everyone. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about information security. It can mean many different things to many different people. So I thought first I'll just step through what information security is and how businesses have changed since the beginning of the year due to the pandemic, and obviously impacting information security. So information security is about obviously the security of information, but it's more about business resilience, the continuity of operations, disaster recovery and accountability. It's not just the IT team, the CTO, compliance, or the CEO's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility within an organisation to understand what information security is and what part they play in making sure that your information is secure. It's not just about personally identifiable information either, it's about corporate information. So all types of information that is really the lifeline, the blood supply to your business. And securing your organisation's information should be one of the top priorities or risks. So it should be spoken about at the top level. So we've got a poll just quickly. So in your business, who's responsible for information security? Be interesting to understand what the audience response is. I'll just give you a minute to respond. Okay. Okay, so it's interesting. So yeah, almost half of the audience, it's the IT team's responsibility. Interesting to see that it's not something that's already in place, and it's good to see that half do actually see that it's everyone's responsibility and everyone has a role to play in that. So thanks. Sorry, the clicking's not going as according to plan. So your strategy, your organisation strategy and goals must include information security, and that should feature quite strongly. To grow and succeed, information's at the heart of any project that's managed in a business, and the objectives should filter down into personal objectives to ensure that there is a responsibility throughout the business, which will turn into the right culture, and it'll ensure that you're able to keep ahead of the competition and the threat actors, which your IT compliance and data strategy should be key. So overall, it is a risk management approach with methodology and effective controls to mitigate, terminate or reduce the likelihood and impact should an issue occur. So how can all this be achieved? So through an information security management system, or you may have referred to it or heard it referred to as an ISMS. So again, we've just got a very quick poll to understand if an ISMS is in place in your organisation. Partially, yes it is, or no it's not. So if you could respond, that would be much appreciated. Right, okay, so a small proportion do have an ISMS in place, 40% with no and 40% with partially, so kind of a mixed result, but good to see that, that some organisations on the call do have an ISMS in place. So the diagram on the right hand side of the screen shows what an ISMS structure looks like. And I'll just quickly talk you through. So an ISMS is more than just a system, it's a culture of how things operate within a business. It's what happens if things go wrong, regional lockdown restrictions, supply chain issues, third-party due diligence. So do you need to recheck your key suppliers due to the pandemic? So do they still have the same security arrangements in place? Have they had to make redundancies? Are they likely to go into administration? So it may be that you want to review your contracts and just make sure that you've got that line of communication open with them to understand what they're going through, as they could be supporting your critical IT infrastructure. It's also about knowing your risks. The limitations and areas of concern will enable you to either fix them, control them, or terminate them. So, for example, stop doing something. And this will allow your business to really take advantage of what you know works well and what has more risks attached. So you might want to focus some attention on them or fix them or stop doing them. But knowing your business risks is a bit like driving a car. So if you know that your brakes are working well, you'll be more confident and you'll be better at driving at high speeds, and you'll probably get to your destination faster and a lot safer. If your car is in desperate need of a service and you know that your brakes are on the way out, you'll probably either not make that journey at all, or if you do, you'll be more cautious and probably take it slower. So it's like I said, it's a risk management methodology, and it's about knowing your risks, and it's okay to accept risks. I've worked in many organisations where a risk is almost like a hot potato. It just keeps getting passed around because no one wants to make a decision. So it's something that does need to be addressed. So if everyone knows how things get done and you have the most efficient processes in place that utilise the technology to the full advantage, it will save time, effort, arguments and money. Sometimes you'll need to make an investment to reap the rewards in the long term. And as we've probably all heard in organisations, it's all about continual improvement. And this will make sure that you're able to manage information securely and be one step ahead of the competition and be prepared for whatever the future holds. We didn't know what 2020 would bring for us, so it's always good to make sure that you've got that one step ahead and that you're looking constantly at reviewing your processes and security arrangements. We can give, at the moment, a free health check to organisations in assessing your risks and resilience in information security. And we also have a similar health check for data protection. So if anyone is interested in that, do contact us. So the new world of information security since March this year, really. So firstly, if you're ISO 27001 certified or follow any of the ISO standards as part of the 27000 family, you should really check that whether your certification is still valid. With business operations changing, having people working from home, data centers now in the cloud rather than being within the office environment, it could have quite an impact on your certification. Especially if you've made redundancies of key people that manage the ISMS or the ISO certification, or they've had roles merged, you'll need to review whether they're trained and knowledgeable enough to be able to carry out these tasks. So before COVID came along, casting your minds back to February, March time, we had more of a stable platform. We had fewer employees working from home and remotely. There was a bit more certainty of the future, or what we thought there was certainty of the future in a stable economy. Less need to capture and process sensitive data. So we're kind of all getting familiar with the QR codes in restaurants and in public places. Track and trace data. We seem to be giving over lots of information to businesses that never used to have to capture this information. Some businesses are also using the QR code from the government and also asking you to complete their own track and trace data, which isn't something that they should be doing. So if they have one system, then that's the system they should use, and the government have recommended it's the QR code. So if you are asked to complete the QR code and also complete the organisation's own kind of paper-based, I'd question why you're doing that. We also had flatter IT and network structures before COVID, so we've all started now using Zoom and all of this different technology remotely. So we're using different parts of networks that we've probably never used before. And complacency as well. I guess we was kind of in a little bubble thinking that it'll never happen to us. And when we did hear about COVID starting in China in December, you know, we probably didn't think that it would hit us as badly as it did. So 2020, what did 2020 bring? It's obviously brought us remote teams and virtual offices, uncertainty of the future in the global economy. We've got more personal and sensitive data being processed, such as businesses temperature checking employees as they come into the office, checking people if they've got positive COVID symptoms, and recording that as well. Lots of temporary workarounds, and Jamie mentioned it. You know, businesses had to react very quickly and put in workarounds to make sure that customer calls could still be answered. So rather than being in a call centre, into their homes. So how long is that going to last for? And those temporary workarounds, kind of sticking plasters, are they going to be reviewed? And reviewed workforces as well. So redundancies have had to happen and roles have been combined. So has there been the adequate and relevant training been given? And do the people have their job descriptions updated as well, which is quite important. And there's lots of shifted priorities. So kind of businesses have gone into survival mode. But there's still lots on the horizon. So we've endured COVID. We have Brexit coming up. We also potentially have a second, third, fourth wave of COVID, which might be with us for a few months yet. and there's the potential for a recession, a global recession. So I guess the key is to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So all of this, how can we actually do something pragmatic now? So within ISO, something that's quite familiar is plan, do, act. So really what can be done is to raise this with the senior management, the board or the shareholders if information security isn't already a top priority. And if it is already a top priority, just make sure it's been reviewed with the lens of kind of what the current situation is, where your business is right now, and probably what the next 6 months may hold. Ensure that you have good documentation in place that's easy to understand and for an employee to read and understand what they need to do. It doesn't need to be war and peace. It just needs to reflect your business as it is now. And if you're going to use off-the-shelf templates, make sure that you customize them to fit your business and not reflect the business that you've bought them off. So they need to be configured. Think how you'd manage through a disaster or to ensure that your business can continue. So what if this happened, what if that happened? And to say it may never happen, like I said, we didn't think 2020 would unfold as it has been. With more remote working, do your employees know what to do to report an incident and breach? And Jamie's example was quite a clear example in the Welsh Government where it didn't seem that it was clear to an employee how to manage an incident and to escalate that. So, you know, maybe it's that you introduce an incident drill, just like a fire drill. It's probably more likely at the moment that there'll be a cyber attack or data loss than the building burning down, especially with people working from home. So it might be a good idea to introduce a role play incident and to see what would happen and to learn from that. And then finally, just training is just key, but not the type of sheep dip training. Training that's really palatable to your employees, that fits your business, that isn't a tick box exercise, and be inventive. You know, it doesn't have to be classroom based. It doesn't have to be read from a script. It could be a video, or it could be like role playing, which really kind of gives the employees and the business a real life scenario of how things would pan out. So I'll pass over to Gavin.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Peter. No, so I'll take over from here. Just make sure. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the protections that we can take to help us stay data safe. I think you'll see that some of the things I talk about today will reiterate exactly what Jamie and Peter also talked about. You know, as Gavin suggested, we like to lead with advice. Yes, we sell technology, but we lead with the advice and consultancy. But the challenge is real, you know, and it's obviously increasing all the time. None more so than sort of small businesses. We see 43% of small businesses that have fallen foul of an incident or a breach just in the last year alone. So, you know, 1 in 2 small businesses. But, you know, one area that we should be really increasing our cautiousness around is the malware. You know, malware and ransomware is regularly being delivered through phishing emails, spear phishing emails as well. And they're getting more sophisticated, often hidden inside very familiar files that we're opening every day. I mean, I'm talking about Microsoft Office files, whether it be Word documents, Excel files. Excel files can be very malicious in terms of delivering this sort of malware and ransomware. But what I want to concentrate on is a lot about the financial cost. You know, we often hear in the news about organizations that have been impacted by malware or obviously ransomware as well. And so, you know, the business is immediately affected and immediately faced with a financial decision about whether they should pay the ransom for that attack. But more often than not, businesses will actually end up paying that because it's quicker to pay the ransom and get access back into your IT systems than it is to try and reject and refuse that. So, but whether they pay the ransomware or not, the ransom, there's also an additional financial cost that is caused by the disruption to the business. And that's typically, it's immediately difficult to quantify what that cost is going to be. The estimated cost of downtime, and so we talk about 50 days as being an average time of business disruption in these sort of cases, can be 20 times higher than the original ransom amount that's been requested. So you can see why a lot of organizations will end up paying ransom costs. So I think the question kind of leads us, to ask ourselves, what would the cost be to my business if I couldn't communicate with my customers? Perhaps I couldn't transact any orders, or even, if I bill for time, for example, how would that impact me for 50 days or more? So I think just a quick, sorry for another poll, but just a quick poll. If you lost access to your IT systems and obviously your data, could you actually bill your customers? Do you have a manual process in place that could allow you to continue operating? Right, it's interesting. So, and we are, and it's not unknown that we are much more reliant on IT systems today to function as a business. We talk about cloud, and again, since COVID, more and more people are moving to the cloud. And so sometimes it's a good practice just to try and find alternative ways in the event of an incident or breach as well. So very interesting. Delay. There you go. Right. So this is just another example of a breach. This is a breach that happened in 2019. A UK-based IT services company fell foul of a typical phishing attack. Targeted on one of their accountancy teams, and through that phishing attack, a hacker managed to obtain credentials and log into that particular employee's email account. So what proceeded from that was they identified that there were numerous invoices that had previously been sent to clients. So it's very easy for them to amend those invoices with new bank details. And then proceed to forward them on to the customers with a reminder for payment which was due. Unfortunately, one client fell foul of this. They didn't do their standard checks, which they should have, which was to phone up and check that those bank account details were legitimately being changed, and transferred well over £100,000 in this particular breach. So could this breach been prevented? Yes, absolutely. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Whose responsibility was it? Well, a little bit of both, really. If you look at the fact that if the supplier had done more cyber awareness training for that particular employee, perhaps they wouldn't have clicked on the phishing email, for example. Again, standard awareness training, whether it's just awareness training of the threat within the financial team, for example, it doesn't necessarily have to be cyber specific, could have been done and should have been done. So again, Jamie talked about complex passwords and that putting better passwords together using terms or names rather than just common passwords that you would use regularly. But I think the biggest one here is, if they had just deployed multi-factor authentication against their email accounts, they could have prevented this breach from happening in the first place. It may not have prevented the phishing email coming through, but they would certainly have prevented the actual attacker getting access to the account, even if they had the username and password. So it's a really, really important one to remember there. Multi-factor authentication is when it's available, it's good to use. So sticking with identity and security, you know, the threats happening all the time. We don't even know about the level of the threat, but this is an example. So here's a stat from Microsoft themselves. So they see 300 million fraudulent sign-in attempts to Office 365 every day. That's a lot of attempts. And, you know, it's all because that these hackers are not doing this manually. This is all done through automation scripts. They've got, as Jamie suggested earlier, they've got databases of usernames and passwords, which they're trying against most of the most common applications that we're utilizing on the internet. And we're all guilty of this. We're all guilty of using our same password for, you know, maybe personal social accounts that we do within business. It happens every day. And so, you know, duplication of password is easy for them to go off and try and attack known particular environments like Microsoft 365. But, you know, it can all be prevented. We can at least take one simple action to prevent 99.9%. That's a large percentage of attacks that can be prevented just by adding multi-factor authentication against them as well. And, you know, it's free, more so than with Microsoft and Google G Suite. They offer this facility for free. They just don't enforce you to enable it. So it's very, very important to look to deploy multi-factor authentication as well. Just on this note, when we talk about multi-factor authentication, I just wanted to cover another breach, which some of you may have heard of recently. It happened in 2018. The ICO handed British Airways a £20 million fine this week. It was basically because they felt BA were negligent in protecting the personal information of its clients. But the standout section for me was with regards to the ICO's penalty notice, was talking about BA's failure to prevent the attack. A simple deployment of multi-factor authentication against what was a Citrix remote access solution for their employees, but also their third parties as well. If they had just put this multi-factor authentication on there, it may well have prevented the breach from happening in the first place. So again, just another example. It's well known in the industry who they are and such. So I want to talk a little bit more about the data visibility and protection. And again, so you know, we're all using Office 365, not all, but a lot of us are using Office 365 today. And it gives us this all-encompassing solution of back office, communication channels. We've got Microsoft Teams, we've got collaboration and file sharing with OneDrive and SharePoint and things like that. But you know, this sort of always available anywhere approach, which is what cloud gives us today, it also brings with it a new security headache, because you know, this is so much data is being shared with all these applications and collaboration tools. It's, you know, it's very important to try and understand what sensitive data you have in the organization. That's the first step. Secondly, is sensitive data being duplicated and stored in multiple locations? Well, I think, you know, talking about all these different collaboration tools, it is definitely happening. Are your employees inadvertently sharing with data with the wrong people? If you're not monitoring this sort of stuff, you won't know. And so it's really important to be thinking about that. And are they storing data in multiple locations that are not visible by the organization? I mean, so often we add a document into a chat window in Teams, you know, then we add it into SharePoint, but we use email far too much today as well to share data. And so 156 million emails every minute are being sent around the world is a large number of data. It's a lot of data that's being transmitted around. So, you know, as Peter mentioned earlier, we cannot expect our users to stay compliant if we don't provide them with sort of clear policies to follow in the first place. And it's also really important to educate your users on those data policies, but also help them to remain compliant, but we also don't want to block them from doing their work or being productive every day. So it's finding a balance there as well with data security. And so where possible, we'll look to put some technology in place that helps warn users or even prevent them from sharing that sensitive information. And in many instances, Microsoft offer this facility already. So it's available to people, businesses in Office 365. And we can monitor what sort of sensitive information is being shared between all of the applications, and wherever possible, if you decide you want to prevent that, that's also available as well. So this facility, these features are all available within Microsoft. So while we're talking about Microsoft, because that seems to be the theme that I've kind of got onto now, so Office 365, there's many policies and configurations that we can improve on. So, obviously the first layer of defense is to help combat these threats, and if we can improve that through 365. So here's some 6 simple steps that I wanted to talk about, which can help us increase those protections and obviously mitigate any risk of a breach. The first one is, the first 2, should I say, is really about increasing the sensitivity of the policies. So how can I protect my email domains better so that people are not trying to impersonate me? So we haven't got hackers trying to impersonate my domain, pretending to email my clients, for example. And again, improving the sensitivity of malware and ransomware protection within Office 365. So if we can help the users a little bit more by preventing these emails coming into their inbox, that's a good step in terms of mitigation straight away. But one thing we see quite a lot of is excessive user privileges. People don't really think about the fact that if a user only needs access to a certain area, you just need to make sure that they've got only a certain level of access. And often I see lots and lots of administrative privileges given to users within Office 365. An admin user in Office 365 is like gold dust to a hacker. Once they've got access to that, they can do anything they want within that environment. So it's very, very crucial to sort of review those sort of access privileges within 365. Help your users to help you. Call it out. Give them a facility to call it out. We talk about more people are working from home now. So no longer have we got the person behind them or next to them to turn around to look for some reassurance about an email, phishing email that may have come through. Again, it's all about, if you've tried to work towards creating a better security culture with your employees, you can get them to support you in your fight against all this cyber attacks and stuff. And again, using things like, this is where you could use technology, things like AI or machine learning to try and understand behaviors of users and actually determine what is a potential threat in terms of email, and then highlighting to the user, this is malicious or this is non-malicious. And employee awareness, it's very important to firstly know where your human cyber risks are. So if you don't know what sort of levels of knowledge that people have got, then it's very difficult to determine how to increase that knowledge through training and awareness. And so doing things like managed phishing simulations, where a controlled environment, you can understand what sort of risk each of your employees is delivering. And then just to finish up, visibility and notifications, again, a feature and function built into a lot of cloud-based applications. It's about monitoring irregular behavior. I'll give you an example that what happens is, if a hacker actually breaches an email account, the first thing he will actually look to do is put a forwarding rule on so that he can forward all the emails to his own account, delete all the emails so that the user doesn't suspect his account's been hacked, so he just thinks he's not getting any email. But effectively, this is behavior that's not typical of a normal employee. So enabling a notification that actually tells you when this sort of irregular behavior happens is really, really important. If you're not monitoring it, you don't know whether you've had a breach or not. So it's very important there. And then finally, data backup. Are you performing regular backups? Do you know what you should be backing up in the first place? And do you test your backups and restore them regularly to understand whether you could restore your business in the event of a breach, for example? So just some 6 simple advisory steps that can be taken there. Sorry, I've got a delay. Here we go. Cool. So just lastly, one other example breach. This one's very different to the last. Jamie talked about making sure your users are updating, or your IT department's updating your Windows devices. This one, we've talked a lot about remote workforce, but this one is an example of not patching software vulnerabilities for critical assets that might be exposed to the internet. We see a lot of businesses will be moving online since COVID. So there'll be these new shop windows, for example. This particular breach, it will impacted effectively. This was an online school payment service by WisePay. And effectively the hackers managed to break into the website and redirect payments, parents' payments for a whole weekend. So the breach happened on the Friday and it wasn't identified until the Monday. The biggest mistake WisePay made here, and they were trying to drive new features and functionality in their website. And then so in the urgency to drive this new website out, they didn't take the adequate precautions in their patching, but they also, you could see that in their attempt to offload payment card risk and responsibilities to things like SagePay, they effectively ignored the importance of securing their own environment and obviously their customers' personal information as well. It's simple. There are many free tools out there. pentest-tools.com. You can go to that website. You can type in your website address and it will come back and give you a free basic assessment of your website. If there's any known vulnerabilities in any open source software. There is always ways to understand whether you are leaving yourself exposed on the internet. And of course, there are also other penetration testing services that can be done to help understand where your vulnerabilities are. But thinking about the fact that they were breached over the weekend, can you imagine, they come into the office on the Monday, they've identified they've had a breach. I don't know, did they have a plan? How quickly did they manage to recover this? How quickly did they manage to eradicate that particular breach? And again, how did they handle that upset to the parents as well? So we kind of talk about having a plan, really. So, and in this case, I'm talking about having an incident plan. So we talk about incident preparedness, and it's very much designed to raise an organization's resilience in the event of a breach and how they will respond to that breach. And so from assessments through to run book creation, things like training, and obviously the intelligence, it's all there. You all need to do this based on preparing for attack and obviously, and dealing with the attack after. So 1 in 10 organizations have a cybersecurity incident response plan in place today. I'm sure that number is much higher for businesses who have a business continuity plan. So we talk about how they're going to react to a fire, for example. But the number who actually have an incident response plan is very, very low. And so preparation is probably the most crucial phase of this incident response task, should we say. It's all about ensuring your employees know what their roles and responsibilities are. So the ones who are having to deal with this incident response, are they trained accordingly to be able to respond to that? So many organizations have an IT team that do a bit of everything, bit of security, bit of networking, but they don't necessarily know how they best respond to this. And so again, it's all about testing. So during the preparation phase, you need to test your plan, regularly test it with some data breach examples in order to be able to respond to that. And I think one example of this is that many businesses, what they do is they go into this sort of panic mode, and the first thing they think they need to do is just delete everything and then restore everything back to where it was before. But again, this might sound very, very daunting from a small business perspective, and you're probably right. But actually, if a small business just did some level of preparation, I'll give an example where I spoke with a small business who were breached. And their standout point to me was when I asked them, what they did, they were like, they basically said, we did not know who to ring. We did not know who to get to help us to resolve this particular breach. So if there's one thing a small business could do is just identify your chosen security partner that you know you could pick up, a bit like an SOS call effectively to help you to deal with this. So on that note, I just want to finish up with one last poll. So basically just, let's take the assumption that you just learned your business has experienced a data breach. Would you know what to do next, for example?
Just while we're waiting for the results of the poll, I can see Glenn's asked a couple of questions in the chat. One in terms of the copy of the presentation, which Tim, I'm assuming you'll distribute to the people on the call.
Yep.
And Peter, one probably aimed a bit more towards you. Well, I think it's really a question for everyone. Do all organisations not appoint a designated owner of information security? But if you could respond in the chat to that, because Glenn said that he needs to pop off soon. And sorry, Darren, to interrupt. I just wanted to pick those out while Glenn was on the call.
No, that's fine. No
Yeah,
problem.
it's fine. I'll drop you a message back, Glenn.
Brilliant. So just to cover the, just as we said, we all see the results. So 67% said yes, they would know what to do next in the event of a breach, which is, I must admit, higher than I expected, but it's good to see anyhow. And 33% said no, they wouldn't necessarily know exactly what to do after a breach. So yeah, interesting results. So yeah, I think that's it for myself. If there's any other questions.
I think we just have one about any sort of looming issues that people need to prepare for. Anything as a takeaway that perhaps they haven't considered yet. Any nasties down the road, I guess.
What a question.
I think there's no right answer.
No, Peter alluded to Brexit obviously earlier and talked about that briefly. And certainly from a data protection point of view, we've left the EU. We have a transitional period until the end of the year. And after that point, we become what's known as a third country. GDPR is a European regulation and we're no longer part of that territory. So that's something that businesses will need to prepare for if there is data sharing going on between the EU and the UK. The government are hopeful that they will have what's called an adequacy decision in place, which allows the continued free movement of data, but they need to get that in by the end of the year. And if they don't, then people will need to review contracts and clauses and things like that. But it's quite complex. If anyone's concerned about that, then feel free to reach out to Peter or I, and we can have that conversation.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much. Just gone at 11 o'clock. I'm mindful that we've sort of come to the end of it. I'm going to have to say I'm still astounded from Darren's note about 300 million fraudulent sign-in attempts daily. Who knew? Thank you for your time, everybody. Fully appreciated. Thank you for those who have joined. I will send out the presentation today. My thanks to Jamie, Gavin, Darren, and Peter from Accelerate and Beacon, respectively. Thank you for your time and your expertise, and everybody, thank you for joining us. And I will see you all soon. And that's the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.